retired cadaver dog suddenly stops cold in the middle of a routine search, then starts clawing at an old basement wall like something's alive behind it. Locals thought it was sealed for good, but what they uncovered next left even the toughest officers frozen in place. Here comes the full story. But hey, before we jump in, drop your dog's name in the comments below. And if you're not already subscribed, now's the time, because what this dog reveals next, you seriously won't want to miss. The house at the edge of Maple Hollow had been abandoned for years. Weather-worn shutters hung at odd angles, and vines clawed their way across the brick like nature was trying to pull it back into the earth. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid walking too close. No one spoke openly about it anymore, but stories lingered like smoke, unspoken but ever-present. The property had once belonged to the Greystone family, a quiet couple with a daughter who vanished a decade ago. No one could prove anything, but whispers said the silence surrounding her disappearance was not natural. The case had gone cold. Files gathered dust in the police archives. Leads dried up. Time, as it often does, moved forward, at least for everyone else. But someone had not forgotten. In a rural sheriff's department tucked into the backroads of Vermont, Detective Eli Warren was staring at an old case file. The photograph of a 7-year-old girl, wide-eyed and gap-toothed, stared back. Her name was Clara Greystone, last seen in her front yard holding a red ribbon and wearing a blue corduroy dress. Eli had just been transferred back home from Boston. He was older now, but Maple Hollow was where he grew up. His father had once walked these same woods as a game warden. Clara's case was the first he remembered seeing in the local paper as a teen. Now, 15 years later, it landed on his desk again, not by accident, but because a neighbor had come forward after all these years. They said the house had made strange noises in the winter, hollow echoes, like something alive was inside the walls. It was nothing to act on, nothing solid. But Eli did not toss the report aside. He had a reason. 2 weeks earlier, a cadaver dog from Boston had saved a case in neighboring New Hampshire by detecting human remains that had been buried beneath layers of concrete. The dog's name was Mace, Belgian Malinois. Retired from federal service but now on call for special assignments. His handler, a woman named Tessa Langford, was a quiet professional. She let the dog do the talking. Eli called in a favor. On a clear morning in late October, they arrived at the Greystone property. Fog curled through the trees, and the leaves had turned every shade of fire. The house loomed like a forgotten monument. Nature had claimed everything but the foundation. Inside, the floorboards moaned underfoot. Dust hovered in sunbeams like memories caught mid-air. Tessa did not speak as she unleashed Mace. The dog sniffed the air, paced the perimeter, then moved from room to room with trained precision. He passed the living room, the kitchen, then stopped at the basement door. Eli watched closely. Tessa nodded, saying nothing. She followed Mace as he padded down the narrow stairs into the dark. The basement was cold, damp. A single window high on the far wall let in enough light to make shadows stretch and lean. Mace moved along the floor, then froze near the back wall. His nose was against the concrete. Then he scratched. Once, twice, harder. Then he began to dig. Eli took a breath. Tessa stepped back. She had seen this behavior before. Dogs did not fake instinct. They did not second-guess scent. Eli knelt and ran his hand along the wall. The concrete was uneven in one section, a slightly different shade, newer. He stood and radioed the sheriff. Within hours, a forensic team arrived with ground-penetrating radar and demolition tools. Tessa took Mace outside. The dog remained alert, pacing, waiting. The team chipped away at the wall carefully. Layer by layer, the wall broke open. What they found behind it was not skeletal remains as expected, but something stranger, a cavity, a sealed chamber roughly the size of a walk-in closet. Inside it, a child's backpack, perfectly preserved. A teddy bear, a ribbon, red and frayed, and a blanket wrapped around what looked like, at first glance, nothing more than layers of cloth. But cloth did not decompose like that. Forensic specialists froze. The sheriff ordered the scene sealed. By nightfall, the story had spread through town like wildfire. The Greystone home, forgotten by time, was suddenly the center of something unspeakable again. But it was not over. That night, Eli reviewed the evidence photos. Something bothered him. The chamber had been constructed with intention. It was not a hiding spot, it was a storage space. There were no signs of a struggle, and more curious, there were no human remains. Not yet, just relics. Silent pieces of a vanished story. The next day, Tessa and Mace returned. Despite protocol, Eli asked them to walk the perimeter of the yard. Mace bolted toward the back of the house. There, in the overgrown garden, he began to bark. Then dig again, wild, determined, frantic. The team followed. 6 inches beneath the soil, wrapped in plastic, they found a metal lockbox, inside rolls of film. Old, fragile. Eli handled them like glass. When developed, the images revealed something impossible to ignore. A man, elderly, holding Clara in his lap, both smiling, not in distress. Behind them, an unfamiliar room, definitely not the Greystone home. One photo showed a woman in a nurse's uniform, her face partially turned, and on the table beside her, a calendar, dated 3 years after Clara had disappeared. Eli felt the hair on his arms rise. If this was real, Clara had not died the day she vanished. She had lived. Somewhere. Someone had taken her. The case had just changed from cold to explosive. For the first time in 15 years, the town's darkest mystery had a pulse. And Mace, a dog no one in Maple Hollow had met before, had become the one soul brave enough to scratch beneath the surface. The photographs were real. Eli had stared at them for hours, his fingers trembling slightly each time he flipped to the next frame. Clara Greystone, missing since age 7, had been alive at least until age 10, smiling in a series of grainy images alongside 2 adults no one in town recognized. The man had sunken eyes, thick glasses, and the slouch of age. The woman wore scrubs, like a caretaker. The setting, unfamiliar, sparse, not a home but a place where someone stayed, temporarily, maybe secretively. It turned the entire investigation upside down. Clara had not run away. She had been moved, hidden, possibly raised in secret for years after everyone thought she was lost forever. The forensics team processed the concrete cavity in the basement again. There were no fingerprints, no blood, no biological remains. The teddy bear was water damaged but intact. The ribbon matched the one Clara wore in her last school photo. Eli folded the image in half, gently, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Tessa remained in town, temporarily authorized as a consultant. She kept to herself, as usual, staying in a rundown motel on the edge of Maple Hollow with Mace sleeping curled by the door. Eli visited her the next morning. The parking lot was covered in a fine mist and the sun had barely risen. Tessa opened the door before he could knock. She did not ask questions. She simply stood aside and let him in. Mace lifted his head. He wagged his tail once, then went still again. Eli handed her the photos. Tessa studied them in silence, then turned to Mace. The dog sat up. "You think he can track her further?" Eli asked, voice low. Tessa shook her head slowly. "He does not follow the living, but he remembers where truth hides." It was a strange statement, but something in it felt profoundly accurate. That afternoon they returned to the Greystone property. Eli had the records pulled, construction permits, land deeds, anything that might explain who had access to the house over the years. One document stood out, a utility work permit filed 2 years after Clara vanished. The signatory was not Harold Greystone, Clara's father, but a man named Tobias Clemens, a part-time plumber and contractor from 3 towns over. It was the first new name in the case. A lie traced the signature. Clemens had died 6 years ago. Natural causes, heart failure. But his address was still on file. The next day, Eli drove out to his old residence, an abandoned property behind a chain-link fence. No one had entered in years. The gate creaked open and the wind howled through broken siding. Tessa had insisted on bringing Mace. The dog jumped from the car, nose to the ground. He sniffed the air, then darted toward the shed behind the house. Tessa ran after him. Inside the shed, time had collapsed. Rusted tools hung crooked on the walls and stacks of boxes leaned like drunks against one another. Mace began circling one corner repeatedly, then sat down. His body alert, ears forward, gaze locked on a wooden crate. Tessa pulled on gloves. Inside the crate, beneath dusty linens and newspapers, were children's drawings, crayons on yellow paper, stick figures, rainbows. A girl with pigtails standing next to a dog that looked eerily similar to Mace, but this could not be. Tessa lifted one drawing from the stack. On the back, written in faded blue ink, Clara, age 9. Eli exhaled like someone had punched the wind out of him. The evidence was piling up, quietly, gently, but undeniably. Clara had been alive at Tobias Clemens' house, at least for a while. But why had no one come forward? Why had no one heard a child, seen a child, unless she had been kept out of sight? Tessa looked around. Mace was scratching now, not urgently, but deliberately, at the floor beneath a set of rotting shelves. A trapdoor. Eli grabbed the flashlight. They lifted the old boards together. Dust rose like smoke. Beneath it, a narrow crawl space with cinder block walls. Inside was a single metal chair, a blanket, a doll, and etched into one brick, crudely with some sharp object, a name, Clara. She had been there, alive, confined, drawing rainbows in darkness. Mace sat quietly, eyes locked on the space as though holding vigil. Eli felt something shift inside him. Back at the sheriff's office, records from Clemens' past were pulled. Something odd stood out. Before he worked as a contractor, he had been employed at a now-defunct rehabilitation clinic for war veterans. The facility had been closed nearly 20 years ago after a series of internal misconduct allegations. Among those listed in the investigation, a part-time nurse named Helen Cray. Eli's hand froze over the report. He flipped back through the photographs they had developed. There she was. The woman in scrubs standing beside young Clara. Helen Cray had vanished 2 years after the clinic shut down. No known relatives, no record of employment since. Dead end, or maybe not. Eli traced a mail forwarding address linked to her final known residence. It led to a vacant rural post office, long since boarded up. But one lead emerged, a name listed in forwarding requests. A small-town box rental under the name H.C. Eastwind, an alias. Tessa drove. They reached the box rental store by late afternoon. It was privately operated, tucked between a hardware shop and a diner in the dusty outskirts of Carter's Falls. The owner was an elderly woman with sharp eyes. No, she did not remember the woman's face. But yes, someone had come every 3 months like clockwork to check the box. Always a man, middle-aged, quiet. She described him in vague terms. Gray cap, long coat, drove an old red pickup. Eli left a card and a promise. If he returned, call immediately. They drove back in silence. That night, Tessa and Mace returned to the motel. Eli sat in his office, the pieces beginning to arrange themselves. 2 people, Tobias and Helen, had been involved in removing Clara from her home, but the motive remained unclear. There had been no ransom, no letter, no demands, and from the evidence, Clara had not been mistreated in a traditional sense. She had been hidden, cared for in some ways, trapped in others. Was it protection, obsession, rescue? Was she still alive? The door to the station creaked open. It was Sheriff Mallory. He held a brown envelope. Courier dropped this off. No return address. Inside, a single photograph, taken within the past year. A woman, late 20s, standing in a field, red scarf, blue eyes. She looked directly into the camera. On the back, one word: enough. Eli stared at the image. He had seen those eyes before. He knew that mouth, that shape of jaw. It was her. It was Clara, alive, watching. The photo was real. Clara Greystone, no longer the missing child on town posters, but a woman grown, quiet, and watching from somewhere unseen. The image shook Eli. It had been dropped off anonymously. No note, no demands, just that single word on the back: enough. Eli ran the photograph through every available system: facial recognition, digital watermarking, metadata analysis. But it had been clean, stripped of identifiers taken likely on analog film, then printed and hand-delivered. No fingerprints, no traces. Tessa didn't ask questions when Eli drove back to the motel and handed her the image. She studied it for a long time, then showed it to Mace. The dog stared at it, and something strange happened. He licked the image once softly and turned to the door, as though he knew. They followed him. That morning, Mace led them east, beyond Maple Hollow, out past the old quarries and into foothills speckled with spruce. The road narrowed, then disappeared into gravel. Eventually, they stopped at a rusted fence hidden beneath hanging vines. A hand-painted sign read, "Windrose Farm, private property." No recent vehicles had passed this way. No tire marks, no footprints. But Mace paced near the gate, sniffed the latch, then sat, waiting. Eli stared past the fence line. An old farmhouse leaned into the wind up ahead. The roof caved at the edges, chimney darkened by time. What stood out most was the quiet, a thick, pressing quiet, as if the place held its breath. Tessa opened the gate. They moved as a unit, Mace ahead, tail low, ears alert. Eli behind him, hand near his sidearm, not out of fear but out of instinct. When they reached the house, no one came to the door, but Mace walked around the side, following something unseen. Behind the house was a shed, almost identical to the one at Clemens' old property. Inside, more drawings, newer, pinned to the walls this time, fluttering slightly from a cracked window. But these weren't children's drawings. They were maps, dates, clippings, articles about missing people, women, girls, boys, some recent, others decades old. Eli froze. Tessa turned slowly, scanning every inch of the room. A journal lay open on the desk. Inside, handwritten notes, almost methodical. She sleeps less now, told her the world still remembers her. She didn't speak, wants to go back, said something about the dog. Mace let out a small whine. He was standing by the back wall, scratching, not frantically but insistently, with purpose. Eli and Tessa moved the shelves aside. Behind it was a wooden door, a cellar. The hinges groaned as it opened. No darkness greeted them this time. Instead, a single lantern flickered below, revealing a stairway cut into old stone. The air was stale, but not dead. They descended slowly. Mace led. At the bottom sat a single chair. No restraints, just a presence. A woman, mid-20s, faded red scarf. Familiar eyes. Clara. She did not run, did not speak. She simply stared at Mace, and Mace stepped forward and sat, right beside her, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. Tessa and Eli stood silently. Clara reached down, one hand trembling slightly, and touched Mace's head. Then, tears. Not loud, not collapsing, just a soft, uncontrollable stream. Tessa did not speak. She did not ask what happened. She did not need to. A lie eventually sat across from her. "You're safe now," he said, barely above a whisper. Clara nodded. Once. The truth came out slowly over the next several days, stitched together not through interrogation but from journal entries, old records, and Clara's own words when she was ready. Tobias Clemens had taken her quietly, methodically, not out of rage, but from a distorted belief that he was saving her. From what, he never said. He worked with Helen Cray, who had once been her nurse during a short hospitalization when Clara was 6. They believed Clara had been marked for something terrible. They believed they were shielding her. The basement wall Mace had uncovered in the old Greystone house, that had been the drop point. Not for a body, but for items. A message. A trade. Helen and Tobias had kept Clara hidden, first at Clemens' house, then later at Winrow's farm, when age and guilt overtook them. When Tobias died, Clara was alone. Helen tried to help her re-enter society. She could not. Clara wandered. Until Mace found her scent again. When the team had first arrived at the Greystone home weeks ago, Mace's scratching at the concrete wasn't just instinct, it was memory. Somehow, some fragment of Clara's scent had remained, and to Mace it was unfinished. Dogs do not forget like we do. They remember in skin, in soil, in silence. That moment at the cellar door in Winrow's farm brought everything full circle. Clara did not go back to her old name. She chose another May after Mace, the dog who had found her twice. She lived quietly for a while in the care of people who understood trauma, patience, and healing. Eli kept a framed drawing she had made in the station of a small girl holding the leash of a dog, much larger than her, standing between two trees under a sky full of stars. Tessa returned to her circuits, responding to calls across counties, but she kept in touch. Every birthday, she sent a note and a new red scarf. As for Mace, he retired. Not in a kennel, not on a couch, but by Clara's side, where he spent his days watching the fields outside Winrow's farm, occasionally nudging open the door to let the breeze in. He had done what no one else could. He had remembered the forgotten. He had listened where no one else did. And in the end, it was not the concrete or the documents that solved the case. It was the dog who refused to stop scratching, because the truth, like a buried scent, was waiting patiently beneath the surface. If that story got to you even half as much as it did us, go ahead and hit that like button. And trust me, the next story we're dropping, it's even more unbelievable. So make sure you're subscribed, because missing it, that's not an option.